And now, your daily dose of debate, breaking news, and uncensored views. This is the Michael Medved Show.
And another great day, another great week, in fact, in this greatest nation on God's green earth. A great week where the president is obviously looking forward to it. President Trump says he just may hit Iran's Karg Island again, just for fun. What is it, a theme park? No, Karg Island is their main base for the Iranians of their whole oil industry. And again, is very vulnerable to American attack. We will talk about that. We'll also talk about some shocking news from the White House staff. A key member of the White House staff, and probably the most valuable of all of the aides to President Trump who work in the White House, Susie Wiles, has just come up with a sad personal announcement. She will be, for the time being, at least continuing her duties in the White House. What is the story there? We will get to that. There is also an analysis by Henry Olsen, who is a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, about why all of the gloom and doom that you are hearing about Republican prospects coming up for the midterm elections, that gloom and doom may be exaggerated. Why? Because of a flaw that involves most of the prominent polls in the country. What is that flaw? We will be covering that on the Michael Medved Show. And for those of you who care, and I do, I've enjoyed watching the Oscars since I was a little boy. And they were a lot more suitable for children when I was a little boy in a different era. But last night, what happened? Well, what happened was that all the prognosticators seemed to be correct. It was a two-way battle between two films in what has been called one of the most unpredictable Oscar ceremonies ever. And the two films that were competing for Best Picture were Sinners and one battle after another. And so who won ultimately? Both films won prominent Oscars. There was only one really obnoxious moment of left-wing political propaganda. Who delivered that moment and in what context? We will get to that as well now that the Oscar season is behind us. Too bad, of the Oscar-nominated films, only one of them was actually on my Best of the Year list, Train Dreams. And no, Train Dreams didn't win anything. But that's typical for some of the values that are, from time to time, on display in the Oscar ceremonies. We will be also speaking about David Drucker, who writes in the Dispatch that the Democrats have a huge problem. And the problem that they have with all of the optimistic prognostications that are going on right now about how they will win back the House, etc., they have a problem with the flag. What is their problem? We will get to that coming up with a column from the Dispatch. Meanwhile, the news I mentioned about Susie Wiles, who is the White House Chief of Staff, and part of the reasons she's been so important to President Trump is because he had the biggest problem of any president in history. And I wrote an award-winning book about this back in the 1970s, 1979 actually, called The Shadow Presidents, which was about all of the chief aides to the White House, to a president of the United States, going back to the beginning of the White House staff, which was 1857. Before that, there was no formal job that was paid for by the American people of White House Chief of Staff or White House aide or aide to the president. Very often, presidents had their sons-in-law or sometimes a nephew, sometimes a son with disastrous impact, who worked with the president in the White House, but you didn't have anybody who held that position. Susie Wiles holds an official position, which is often called the second most prominent position in the executive branch, which is White House Chief of Staff. And President Trump posted on Truth Social today, Susie Wiles is an incredible chief of staff. Well, she has been a stable voice in this White House, not bouncing around from one chief of staff to another, as President Trump did during his first term, where I believe he had at one time or another 5 different chiefs of staff. Susie Wiles has been a steadying influence. Susie Wiles, he writes, is an incredible chief of staff, a great person, and one of the strongest people I know. But unfortunately, she has been diagnosed with early stage breast cancer and has decided to take on this challenge immediately as opposed to waiting. So you don't really have that much choice. She has a fantastic medical team, the president says, glad to hear that, and her prognosis is excellent, exclamation point. During the treatment period, she will be spending virtually full time at the White House, which makes me as president very happy. Her strength and her commitment to continue doing the job she loves and does so well while undergoing treatment tells you everything you need to know about her. Susie, as one of my closest and most important advisors, is tough and deeply committed to serving the American people. She will soon be better than ever, exclamation point. Melania and I are with her in every way, and we look forward to working with Susie on the many big and wonderful things that are happening for the benefit of our country, signed President Donald J. Trump. He doesn't say in this message, thank you for your attention to this matter. Why is Susan Wiles so valuable and important to President Trump? Well, consider the alternatives. If she had to take a leave of absence, who would be the most likely person to replace her? Steve Miller. No, no, really, that guy, yes. And that would be a disaster for one reason. What's wrong with Stephen Miller? Well, aside from some of his ideas about importing 21 million people, is I think one of the things he's mentioned, that kind of number. Yeah, with all of that, he has another problem, which he loves publicity. And one of the things in my book, The Shadow Presidents, which has been widely acknowledged to be a true lesson of history, is that the one thing that a White House chief of staff or a top aide needs to avoid is publicity. Anybody who is working at that job where you're not elected, you're just so selected by the president, anyone who hogs publicity is in trouble and is not going to be able to give the president the kind of service you need from a chief of staff. And the idea that Stephen Miller and his wife have been so much front and center and love going on TV and getting publicity, it's actually reminiscent of some of the faults with Jimmy Carter's aides, who were also publicity hungry. And for instance, you may remember at one point his acting chief of staff got in trouble because he made a comment after a White House dinner about sitting next to the wife of the president of Egypt, and that was Anwar Sadat, and saying that he was impressed by her low-cut dress, which revealed the twin pyramids of the Nile. Yeah, no, that didn't do well. We will be right back on the Medved Show talking about the secret flaw that Henry Olsen points out about the polling about the midterm elections. We'll get to that, Oscar summary, and much more coming up on the Medved Show.
This episode is brought to you by Cologuard. Do you know what's really scary? Not screening for colon cancer when you turn 45. The Cologuard test is non-invasive, requires no special prep or time off work, and ships right to your door. In just 3 simple steps, Cologuard takes the scare out of colon cancer screening. If you're 45 or older and at average risk, ask your healthcare provider about the Cologuard test. Cologuard is available by prescription only. Learn more or request a prescription today at Cologuard.com/screen.
And on the Michael Medved Show, talking about news that shakes up the country a little bit. One Los Angeles gas station has started charging people $8.21 a gallon to fill up. It's not $8.21 for a fill up, it's $8.21 per gallon to fill up, which means that usually when you're filling up, you're getting 10 or 12 gallons, right? If you have a car with a decent capacity. And so $8.21 a gallon, you're talking about $100 for a fill up? Could that be real? Meanwhile, Trump says the U.S. may hit Iran's Karg Island again just for fun. Okay, what's fun about it? This is reported today by PBS. President Donald Trump threatened Monday to strike Iran's Karg Island again following an attack last week that destroyed key military facilities, saying, "I told them openly, I'll knock the hell out of it." Okay, what does that mean? The comments came during a 3-minute phone call Monday morning with Liz Landers of PBS News while the president was attending what he described as a very important meeting on the Iran war. Trump announced Friday on Truth Social that he had totally obliterated every military target on Karg Island, home to a small oil terminal in the Persian Gulf that ships 90% of Iran's oil exports. Many of those exports, by the way, go directly to China. U.S. military officials reported over the weekend that a number of military and missile facilities were destroyed in the American attack, but oil infrastructure was preserved. Iran Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said that Iran would retaliate if the country's oil or energy infrastructure was attacked. Why is President Trump reluctant to hit the oil and energy infrastructure? Well, one thing is because that would have an impact on the global oil price, driving that price upward, making the oil more scarce. Secondly, you may remember when President Trump announced the war, one of the things that he was criticized for in the announcement was the expectation that he expressed that there would be a rising up of the Iranian people who would take over their country and depose the regime and start the process of regime change, etc. Now, that hasn't happened. And yes, there was evidence right at the very beginning of this war 2 weeks ago. There was evidence that there was a great unpopularity of this regime. But the idea of huge crowds in the streets and challenging the authority of the Revolutionary Guard Corps and the other elements of power that keep the Iranian regime in power, well, that hasn't happened. And so the idea that they are going to destroy all their oil capacity, all their infrastructure, that makes it more likely that it'll be more difficult to try to rebuild the country with a modified regime or any regime that reflects the will of the people in a more constructive way than this regime, which, according to all reports, has only minority support in Iran. Meanwhile, the New York Times is reporting American allies around the world have responded coolly to or outright rebuffed President Trump's call to send warships to help escort merchant vessels in and out of the Persian Gulf, illustrating the consequences, says the New York Times, of his dismissive approach to global alliances. The sharpest refusal came today from Germany, whose defense minister, Boris Pistorius, said, "This is not our war. We did not start it." Top officials of Japan, Italy, and Australia said Monday that their countries would not participate in efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Others were non-committal, including France, South Korea, and Britain, whose Prime Minister Keir Starmer said his country could not be drawn into a wider war. Mr. Trump's calls on social media on Saturday for other nations to join the United States in an effort to protect the flow of oil, that came just a week ago when he turned down Mr. Starmer's offer to send 2 British aircraft carriers to the region. "We don't need people that join wars after we've already won," Mr. Trump said at the time, which is an insulting thing to say about an offer that might have been very useful to the United States. As Iran blockades most traffic through the oil shipping choke point, Mr. Trump's appeal was the first time he had sounded eager to build a broad coalition against Iran. But he was asking for backup from allies who were not consulted ahead of the U.S. decision to go to war, and who were derided by Mr. Trump in the past. The American-Israeli air war against Iran, now in its 3rd week, has killed more than 2,000 people, mostly in Iran and Lebanon, where the Hezbollah terrorist group has been firing its own attacks very regularly on Israel. And it has drawn in much of the Middle East as Iran has launched rockets and drones at neighboring countries and at ships in the Gulf. Global energy prices have skyrocketed, with tanker traffic all but stopped through the Strait of Hormuz, a conduit for around 1/5 of the world's oil shipments. The price of Brent crude, which sounds like a porno star, doesn't it? Brent crude? Okay, the price of Brent crude, the global benchmark for oil, briefly reached $106 on Monday. That's today, now. The United States appears to have been unprepared for the extent of the retaliation by Iran and the need to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz, something that administration officials have discussed publicly since the first week of the war. But it hasn't started yet. Mr. Trump said NATO member nations should help and told the Financial Times on Sunday, "If there's no response, or if it's a negative response, I think it will be very bad for the future of NATO." Great. He called on China to send naval escorts too, but Beijing has little incentive to cooperate. We will get to the latest and more about understanding the truth behind polling on the midterm elections coming up. That and more coming up on the Medved Show.
Baseball is back, and the first pitch is on Netflix. The New York Yankees, led by 7-time All-Star Aaron Judge, head to the San Francisco Bay to take on Rafael Devers' San Francisco Giants. This season kicks off with one exclusive opening night game. Watch MLB Opening Night, the New York Yankees versus the San Francisco Giants, live on Netflix. Wednesday, March 25th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific.
And on the Michael Medved Show, the war has reached a painful moment that may impact the future of NATO. Now, NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It usually doesn't involve the Middle East. But here, President Trump has said that if NATO member nations don't help, escort ships through the Straits of Hormuz and help with the safe passage of oil and protecting the world economy. If NATO nations like France and Germany and the United Kingdom and Italy, if they don't help with this process, quote, I think it will be very bad for the future of NATO. Does that mean that he is suggesting that the United States would withdraw from NATO, uh, basically dispensing with its crucial in keeping Ukrainian independence alive? NATO backs Ukraine and has done so much more clearly and forcefully than President Trump, who goes back and forth in terms of his infatuations with Vladimir Putin. He says, I think it'll be very bad for the future of NATO if the NATO powers don't help him. It also would be bad for the relationship between the U.S. and China. President Trump called on China to send naval escorts too, but Beijing has little incentive to cooperate. Iran, which sells oil to China, is letting its ships pass safely to get this oil to China, but not to the rest of the world. Mr. Trump has threatened to postpone a planned summit meeting with Xi Jinping, China's leader, as he focuses on the war. And as he focuses on the war, he has another focus that is distracting his attention. Politico is reporting that President Donald Trump is bringing back 2020. Now, why would he want to bring back 2020? That was the year he lost the election. And he lost by 7 million votes. Honest to God, you can look it up. He lost by 7 million popular votes to Joe Biden, who, let's face it, was not an outstanding candidate, was he? So why does he want to bring back 2020? Because he is convinced the whole thing was a fraud and he cheated and that he actually won the election rather than losing by 7 million votes. The Politico reports President Donald Trump is bringing back 2020. Many Republicans wish he wouldn't. Conversations with nearly a dozen GOP state and county chairs and strategists reveal a party largely eager to move on from relitigating Trump's election grievances, which they've worried may detract from an economic message that actually motivates voters. But the president won't let it go. He can't speak without mentioning the fact that he thinks he was cheated by the election of 2020, which, okay, can we get this clear? 2020 was 6 years ago. The president won't let it go. He is subpoenaing 2020 election records and putting pressure on lawmakers to pass legislation to overhaul voter registration laws. And meanwhile, The Hill is reporting that on this same front of battle, which is not the important battle we're engaged in right now, we have a very important future of America, future of our alliances kind of war that is going to have an impact on the whole country and its future. The Save America Act, not so much. The Senate now faces a marathon Save America Act debate. Oh, terrific. Just what the country needs. The Save America Act voting reform bill is set to dominate the week on the Senate floor in a major test for GOP leaders, with allies of the president pushing for an extended debate. President Trump has declared that the bill, which will Save America, stands for the Secure American Voter, and I forget what the E is. Effectiveness, accuracy, no, that's not E. In any event, President Trump has declared that the bill, which would add new requirements for registering to vote and casting a ballot, to be his top legislative priority. He's made clear that he sees the bill as crucial to GOP success in the midterm elections and called on Senate Republicans to do whatever is necessary to get it passed and send it to his desk, including changes to the upper chamber's longtime filibuster rules. In other words, he wants to abandon those requirements for a filibuster for getting a 60% of the vote and saying that you should be able to pass a piece of legislation with just a bare majority or even without a majority, with the vice president casting the deciding vote. Senate Majority Leader John Thune has insisted Republicans don't have the votes needed to change the filibuster. Thune plans to bring the bill to the Senate floor this week after it already passed in the House last month, but Democrats who were broadly opposed to the legislation would be able to block it from advancing under current Senate rules, effectively killing it. Now, part of why the Democrats are so much against this bill is because in the way that President Trump is insisting it would get rid of telling the truth when he says that no nation in the world does vote by mail. There are 34 nations, including some of the most effectively functioning democracies out there. As Republicans stare down a treacherous midterm landscape, writes The Hill, there's a growing view inside the party that focusing on stolen election claims from 6 years ago and voter fraud will kneecap them in the general election. That messaging might play well with the MAGA base in primaries, but it could alienate moderates tired of rehashing claims of election fraud from nearly 6 years ago. It's by the way, the E in the Save America Act, it's Safeguard American Voter Eligibility. Epic? Epic is no, it's Epic Fury is the name of the campaign against Iran. Meanwhile, not quite Epic Fury, but it's making people furious. The Dispatch is reporting that Federal Communications Commission Chairman Brendan Carr warned over the weekend that broadcasters airing hoaxes and news distortions should correct course before their license renewals come up or risk losing their licenses to broadcast. The latest in a series of administration threats against media outlets over their coverage of the war in Iran. Carr's tweet came in reply to a Truth Social post from Trump that accused the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and other publications of running intentionally misleading headlines about Iranian missile strikes on 5 U.S. refueling tankers at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. Why would the leading journals in America want to smear the American war effort? It's an interesting question, at least to throw on the table. We'll be right back on The Medved Show. And on the Michael Medved Show, President Trump has already reacted to statements by the chairman that he has appointed, a chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, who has threatened the licenses of various news outlets, he says, for, quote, intentionally misleading headlines about Iranian missile strikes on 5 U.S. refueling tankers, that's aircraft, not ships, at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. Coverage that President Trump called inaccurate and claiming 4 of the 5 planes that they reported had been attacked had no damage, or he says virtually no damage. Trump said yesterday that he was thrilled that the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission thrilled that that chairman was looking at the licenses. The FCC does not directly license national networks, only individual local stations, including network-owned and independently owned affiliates. And the FCC has not denied a broadcast license renewal in decades. Current TV license renewals are not scheduled to come up again until late 2028, in the midst of the national election, presidential election. So after the midterm election that is coming up in a couple of weeks, it's, believe it or not, on its way. The idea that you're going to check out their licenses. What about, does the president of the United States need a license to broadcast lies about the price of gas, about election results, about inflation, about anything? No. The president has the right to say what he wants to say, and he'll get fact-checked on it. And by the way, the same thing is true of the private media, is that if they say something that is blatantly wrong, and it's not at all clear that they did so in this case about the attack on Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, but then one of the other broadcast outlets will correct them and fact-check them. Fox News does that aggressively. Newsmax does it aggressively. And if they are not just given fact-checking, they could get sued. I mean, what is it? President Trump is suing the Wall Street Journal for $10 billion for the drawing that he did for Jeffrey Epstein's 2003 50th birthday. No, it sounds like a joke, but he is suing the Wall Street Journal for that, even though the evidence is overwhelming that he really did draw that picture. And we have other pictures that he has even acknowledged that he drew that have the same style. All of this is extraordinary and inconsistent. And meanwhile, there is more concerning the Oscars last night. The Academy Awards, 98th Academy Awards, I believe it was. The 98th Academy Awards were broadcast last night, and the ratings haven't come out yet, but they may be feeble. And feeble largely because the movies that won pretty much everything last night, Sinners, which was nominated for a record number of 16 Oscars, and it won, I believe, 5 last night. But it won Best Actor, and because the Michael C. Jordan, the actor who's no relation to the basketball player, but that Michael Jordan played a dual role. He played twin brothers, and it was it takes you a while to figure it out that it's the same actor, because it was a very fine job, and he deserved all kinds of praise, and he even gave something of a classy thank you to the Motion Picture Academy when all of that occurred. But there were a few jabs at Trump from host Conan O'Brien, but he was mostly feeble, Conan O'Brien, in my opinion, and not particularly entertaining. They did something that I haven't seen before, is they began and ended the broadcast with Conan O'Brien sort of entering one of the movies nominated for Oscars. And the opening bit showed him putting on makeup so that he looked like Amy Madigan, who was the winner for the Best Performance by a Supporting Actress for a movie that nobody saw. Really, nobody saw. Weapons, right? you hear about weapons, you see weapons. No, but Amy Madigan won the Oscar for supporting actress. And so he put on a skit where he was made up in this garish makeup, like the makeup that had disfigured Amy Madigan. And then he had a sequence from the film where a whole horde of possessed children and demented children are chasing the Amy Madigan character, or chasing Conan O'Brien and chasing him right into the Academy Awards uh, recital hall. And it was all very elaborately staged. But then the very end of the Oscar ceremony, right after they were doing credits, they had another reference to the very end of the winning one battle after another. One battle after another, greatly overrated in my opinion. I gave it 2.5 stars when it came out. I think it's long and not a notable or outstanding film at all, but it won Best Picture and won Best Director after 11 previous nominations. Finally, Paul Thomas Anderson won. But the very end of the film, and one of the things that is tough to like about it, is that there is a major character played by Sean Penn. Sean Penn also won the Oscar for Best Performance by a Supporting Actor, and he didn't show up, however, because I don't know why Sean Penn didn't show up. He's won 2 Oscars before. Been there, done that. But in any event, his character, who plays a right-wing army officer, who's really the villain of the piece, is given a big award, and he is ushered into a private office, and then they lock the door of the private office, and gas comes in to kill him. And then you see a scene of him and his body being stuffed into a morgue. Okay, happy ending for all because the bad guy gets killed. By the way, spoiler alert, but I think people had it spoiled last night when they staged that entire sequence with Conan O'Brien in the same role as Sean Penn in the movie. And so the last thing you see from the Academy Awards is a dead body being stuffed into the morgue. A dead format, is that what we have? We will be getting to questions about the polling, speaking about alive or dead. Basically, the chances, says Henry Olson of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, the chances for Republican victory are much better than many of the polls indicate. Why? Because of something that is wrong with the polls. We will get to what that is coming up on the Medved Show. We will also be speaking to Professor Pape about the impact of politics on domestic violence. Robert Pape, professor of political science at the University of Chicago, will also be joining us as we continue to talk about a fateful week, our 3rd week of a war that is important for the United States to win, in my passionate opinion. That and more coming up in this greatest nation on God's green earth.